What's up, folks? I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, back again to talk to you about the Week 2 main slate here on DraftKings and FanDuel. We have a lot to go through. Once again, we have a 12-game slate here on DraftKings, 13 on FanDuel because they have made, including the primetime Sunday Night Football game this week between the Bears and the Texans. It looks like it's a permanent fixture of FanDuel's main slate. So I think in every video I will go through the DraftKings plays, and then I will go to FanDuel and talk about who to mix in from the primetime game. Expect that to be the normal agenda of the show moving forward for the rest of this season, guys. First and foremost, I always like to start with my favorite player on the slate. You see him on the screen here. Shouldn't be much of a surprise. Cooper Kupp is back to 2021 levels, guys. 21 targets last week. He was targeted on 41% of his routes last week for the Rams, played 100% of the snaps in their loss last week in overtime to the Detroit Lions. And yes, obviously a lot of that was due to the immediate unfortunate loss of Puka Nacua in that game. But now with Puka Nacua on injured reserve, no, we're not going to project 21 targets again for Cooper Kupp. But what we are going to project is still a team-high route share, target share, air yard share, and therefore, simply put, just a player that is completely underpriced at $7,600 here on DraftKings and $7,700 over on FanDuel. So I think Cooper Kupp should be in every single lineup this week. Once again, I think we're looking at a potential flex wide receiver slate as well here, especially on DraftKings. So because Cooper Kupp plays in that 4 p.m. window, I also think you want to consider him for that flex spot as well. Normal agenda of the show, I like to run through spreads and totals in the betting markets to look at which running backs might be in the most favorable game script opportunities for us to leverage in our lineups this week. And the biggest favorite on the board actually is the Baltimore Ravens in their matchup with the Las Vegas Raiders here in week number 2 in their home opener. And that means King Henry, come on down. Except Derrick Henry is not projecting for a tremendously high amount of ownership this week. If we go over to the Occupy model, and I pull up the running backs for you guys here, you'll see that we actually have Derrick Henry ranked as one of our 3 favorite plays at the position this week, but he is projecting for just 7% ownership on DraftKings at $6,700, just 10% ownership over on FanDuel. So Derrick Henry, even though he's expected to be in the most favorable game script environment with Baltimore favored by 8 points here at home, actually profiled as a better high-risk play, tournament play here in week number 2, because this is not where the field is this week with Mr. Henry. The second biggest favorite on the board, the Detroit Lions in their home game here against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is a rematch of the NFC divisional round last year. We have a slightly better matchup on the ground than for running backs in the passing game against the Buccaneers defense this week. So I do think that is an edge for $6,000 David Montgomery here on DraftKings. Positive game script with the Lions favored by a touchdown here. I would expect Montgomery to have a lot of the early down rushes and have an opportunity to score in the red zone for the Lions here. But obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs and his PPR-friendly role in this offense is nothing to sneeze at. And we did see him actually get some reps on at least one goal line drive last week. So pick your poison here. Gibbs, 6,600. David Montgomery, 6,000. Both of these guys going to profile as good tournament plays as well because the field is not entirely sure which one of these guys is going to be the quote-unquote correct one to own against Tampa Bay. But with Tampa Bay and Detroit having the highest total on the board this week, I think we're going to come back to this spot for our tournament discussion at the end of the show. The Dallas Cowboys are favored by 6 points in their home opener here against the New Orleans Saints. Zeke Elliott led this team in opportunities last week against Cleveland on the road with 10 carries and 2 targets. Rico Dowdle's really the only other running back of note behind him that is seeing work. I don't think I'm going to be playing either one of these guys this week, but if you were going to take a flyer, I think Elliott at a modest price here is probably the best of the two to play against the Saints. Saints were a below average defense defending running backs last year, so not necessarily looking to trust any trends from just a 1-week sample. The Saints benefited from playing the worst team in the NFL last year, Carolina, in week number 1, and what we've seen so far is that Carolina might still be that, unfortunately, for you Panthers fans. So remains to be seen just how good the Saints are. Remains to be seen just how bad the Panthers are. But if everything obviously is up to the same caliber as last week, then Elliott is in a position to have a decent day here. Probably the marquee game of the weekend, the Chiefs and the Cincinnati Bengals. Isaiah Pacheco is the only running back of note here for the Kansas City Chiefs. In the opening game last Thursday, we didn't really see anything from Samaje Perine to be worried about. We didn't really see anything from fullback / running back Carson Steele to be worried about. So expect Pacheco to be the guy that gets the majority of the touches in this backfield here against the Bengals in Kansas City's second home game of the season against the Bengals. The Bengals were a below average rush defense last year, so Pacheco also in a good spot to put up a decent number here with Kansas City favored by 6 points this weekend. Speaking of those Carolina Panthers that looked poor last week, we have the Los Angeles Chargers in that spot on the road here against Carolina. J.K. Dobbins was the far more explosive player on his touches last week. 10 rushes, 3 targets, caught all of those targets, and obviously had a couple of big runs. That's how he was able to get to 135 and a touchdown on the day. We cannot entirely rule out Gus Edwards because we see that he out-touched Dobbins on the ground, had 1 target, so not as involved in the passing game. I love J.K. Dobbins for high-risk contests this week. I think we have to trust the fact that Jim Harbaugh and this staff has suggested that they're going to ride the hot hand here, and there's certainly no argument against the hot hand belonging to Dobbins here. But just relative to some of the other plays that we have to discuss on this slate at running back, Dobbins' profiles is a little bit more high risk just purely because he does have some more competition within his own backfield for touches. This is kind of your discount Lions backfield, if that makes sense. Dobbins and Edwards, same backfield as the old Ravens days, is going to be just as tricky to navigate, I think, as Gibbs and Montgomery on a weekly basis here in DFS. Favorite play on this slate, I guess it does still technically hinge on some confirmation from the 49ers with their final injury report, but we got the shocking announcement about an hour and a half before lock on Monday Night Football earlier this week that Christian McCaffrey is going to be inactive for week 1. He has been characterized all week in the media as a long shot to play here in week 2 on the road against the Vikings. Now, he did get a limited session in on Thursday in practice, so that does leave open the door just a crack that McCaffrey will be back to play against the Vikings. I'm going to assume that McCaffrey is going to be out on Sunday. So if we get news that McCaffrey is actually playing on Sunday, unfortunately, guys, disregard about the next 2 to 3 minutes of this video and potentially some of the lineup strategy piece as well, because a lot of this week's approach, I think, depends on getting Jordan Mason in your lineups. I think it's just that simple this week. We saw how explosive he was as the starter for the 49ers in week number 1, and he came in price at just $5,200 here in the CMC role for the 49ers here. Nothing really to write home about behind him in this backfield with Isaac Guerrero. We have Kyle Juszczyk, obviously the fullback there as well, but it is the Jordan Mason show through and through here for the 49ers if Christian McCaffrey is out once again here in week number 2. Minnesota Vikings were a tough run defense last year, but the 49ers have one of the best run blocking offensive lines in the game. And bottom line, we have a Kyle Shanahan running back priced like he's still the backup here for the 49ers, who should be starting here in week number 2 against Minnesota. So Jordan Mason, not just our highest ranked running back this week on DraftKings and FanDuel, probably going to be the highest owned player at running back by everybody. Low risk, high risk contest, no matter what. Bottom line, Jordan Mason at running back, Cooper Kupp at wide receiver. This is one of those, I think, with kind of the injuries that came out of Sunday and Monday, quickly turned into one of those prove it slates where you better show up to the table with these 2 guys in your low risk lineups. Again, assuming McCaffrey is officially ruled out, because if you don't, you're probably just giving money away this week, guys. So Jordan Mason at running back, the best play on the board. And that is a rundown of the biggest favorites. San Francisco also favored by 5 points here on the road against the Vikings. So we have 6 teams favored by 5 points or more this week. So this week is actually profiling to be a little bit more unbalanced compared to week 1. A lot of non-competitive games potentially expected here. And as we talk about these larger spread totals, I think it's important to remember that in high-risk contests, when we go much further than that touchdown spread differential, it becomes a little bit more difficult to see a bring back making sense in stacks. When spreads get to that 8, 9, 10-point number for the favorite, we usually see 2-0s and 3-0s win on DraftKings and FanDuel. So just keep that in mind as you get ready to build for some of your high-risk contests and consume a little bit of the rest of this video that I have for you here. Talked about how Detroit and Tampa Bay is the highest total on the board this week, 51.5 points. Kansas City and Cincinnati at 48 points was number 2. And then the Rams and the Cardinals at 47.5 points is right there as the third highest total on this slate. It's not just Cooper Kupp that I think is worth exploiting on this slate. We spent all summer long talking about drafting Blake Corum in the 10th round in best ball drafts on Underdog and on DraftKings here to take advantage of all of the coach speak that Sean McVay was putting out there about mixing in Corum, drafting him in day 2, not wanting to overwork Kyren Williams. And then we basically threw all of that out the window in week number 1 against the Detroit Lions in an overtime game where Kyren Williams got 18 carries. He had 3 targets. Yes, I understand the fantasy output here is a little meh at 14.4 PPR points. But if we jump over to the box score here, you see that Kyren Williams played 71 of 78 possible snaps for the Los Angeles Rams at the running back position. Basically had all of the important, meaningful running back touches. Ronnie Rivers played the other 7 snaps. Blake Corum didn't play at all. So we can officially, at this point, I think, rule Blake Corum out as a true threat, at least early in the season, to Kyren Williams' workload here for the Los Angeles Rams. And now we have a running back that came into the week 2 slate priced as if he's going to be in that timeshare. He's $6,800 here on DraftKings. So even though Kyren, underdog on the road against Arizona this week, is anticipated to be in a slightly negative game script, Arizona's only favored by 1 point here. You have the third highest total game on the board here. You have the wide receiver who is anticipated to have the safest high floor, high ceiling role in the NFL this week. And you have a running back that's going to play 90% plus of the snaps and get 90% plus of the opportunities in the running and the passing game for the Los Angeles Rams. I think it makes sense to have 2 Rams in your low risk lineups this week. We get the news that Christian McCaffrey is out, and this is 1,000% locked in as my core for my lineups this week. I'm not going to be deviating from this whatsoever. These are my 3 favorite plays, locked and loaded for week number 2 in DFS. If you're looking for another running back, since we're still on the subject, that should be pretty popular this week, Breece Hall with the New York Jets favored by 4 points on the road against the Tennessee Titans is going to catch a decent amount of ownership, probably in that 25 to 30% range. That's what we're forecasting in our Occupy model this week. But Breece Hall is outside of like a top 15 plays in our model for tournaments. So this is one of those positions that I think, believe it or not, we're actually advocating a little bit of a fade in tournaments with Breece Hall here. Trust the model, guys. The model's been very good to us week in and week out. Breece Hall probably worth considering for your low-risk lineups at an exorbitant ownership number, like 50% plus of low-risk lineups, as that doesn't indeed kind of materialize, take hold, and take place here. But I do think in tournaments there are other places that we can go, and I've already discussed them in this video. So that's my thoughts on the running back position. I mentioned how I thought that there was a really strong opportunity for this to be another wide receiver in the flex slate. And it comes down to the pricing just being so loose again here, guys. Cooper Kupp's only $7,600 in a spot where he probably should be like 87 or more at least. If you were happy to pay for Tyreek Hill last week in week 1, he was $8,700. Cooper Kupp projects for a stronger workload than Tyreek did last week, and we get him significantly cheaper. Like it's not even a debate here to have him in your lowest lineup. But some of the other plays that the field is going to be on this week, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs are going to be pretty popular plays in both low and high risk contests. I think Patrick Mahomes is going to be your most popular quarterback in low risk contests this week. That's how we're projecting it in our model. We have Mahomes at the highest projected ownership in DraftKings tournaments. And so the best way to get exposure to this passing game, if you're not going to play Mahomes, or even if you are going to play Mahomes, is the wide receiver who played basically the entire game and got the majority of the opportunities for the Chiefs in the passing game last week at just $6,700 here on DraftKings. Another player that should probably be priced like $7,500 or above here on DraftKings. Really, really cheap here on DraftKings and FanDuel once again. Probably has another 8+ target expectation at $6,700. Get him into your low risk lineups. Depending on where you want to go here, you can get another decently mid-range price wide receiver that should have a really, really strong role. We saw that if Christian McCaffrey misses time, that Deebo Samuel's not just going to be involved in the passing game. He had 9 targets in a positive game script for the 49ers against the New York Jets Monday Night Football. He also got 8 carries and was the legitimate backup running back to Jordan Mason. So you can get Deebo Samuel and Jordan Mason in your low-risk lineups here, and you actually have exposure to what is likely to be the majority of the touches on offense in the passing game and virtually all the touches in the running game for a San Francisco offense that has the fourth highest implied team total on this slate at 25.75 points as 5-point favorites against the Minnesota Vikings. So he's right here as a good low risk play. And once again, on the other side of this Cincinnati and Kansas City game, we have pretty much at this point, it's 12:30 p.m. here on Friday afternoon, received confirmation that T. Higgins is going to miss his second consecutive game. He did not practice on Friday, so he's almost certainly going to be ruled out by the time I post this video. Andrei Iosivas here played all of the snaps last week for the Bengals. I understand that the box score output here, super disappointing against the New England Patriots in Cincinnati's upset loss. But 6 targets, ran all the routes that were available in that offense, and should be in line to do that once again here in a game where their opponent won't be trying to grind clock and end the game as quickly as possible. Kansas City's going to keep that tempo up. They're going to play offense because they know that they're good at offense, unlike the New England Patriots. And therefore, that is going to force Cincinnati to play offense as well here. So a little bit of the proverbial flop lag spot here for Andrei Iosivas coming, I think. So I think Yoshi here is another play that is really, really strong for low-risk contests, probably high-risk contests as well if his ownership stays extremely reasonable. We have an opportunity at the tight end position to go with some cheap plays this week. We already know David Njoku has been ruled out for the Cleveland Browns. So if you're going to pay down at the position, I think the most popular play people will do that with is Jordan Akins. He played basically half the snaps last week. He was targeted on 10% of his routes. And this is also a tight end that has a pre-existing relationship with Cleveland's starting quarterback from their days in Houston together. So this is probably one of the better high floor punts here at just $3,000 here on DraftKings that will be available. But I think some other plays in this range that could end up being decently popular. Colby Parkinson with the Rams, another Ram you can get in your lineup. 5 targets last week. Probably going to play a similar role here in week number 2. And then we also have, obviously, Mike Gesicki at tight end. Should run more routes without T. Higgins out there. We have a little bit of reason to believe that Jake Ferguson might be ruled out for Dallas. He's questionable. So if that happens, we get a $2,900 cheap tight end here on DraftKings with Luke Schoonmaker with Dallas favored heavily. Like, this is one of those slates where there's plenty of pay down options at tight end, but there's plenty of pay up options too. Trey McBride in that Rams and Cardinals game, probably, I think, the best way to get exposure to this Arizona Cardinals offense. If you've been on the internet, you've seen nothing but the excoriating of Marvin Harrison Jr. for being one of the slowest guys as far as top speed is concerned on the field in his debut. Some questioning his effort out there. We've seen Kyler Murray talking about how it's not his job throwing the ball. It's a disaster in Arizona right now as far as the number one, their first round draft pick is concerned and their quarterback. But a player that has a good relationship with that quarterback, that has a ton of work week in and week out, Trey McBride here, 9 targets last week, should be in a position to have a very similar role here once again in week number 2. And finally, our first classic slate of the year, of course, that includes Travis Kelce, a modest showing on Thursday Night Football to begin the season last week against the Ravens. But Travis Kelce should be pretty popular here as well, with Kansas City catching a ton of the ownership in contests this week on DraftKings and FanDuel. On defense, I think we're going to go with the Seattle Seahawks on the road against the Patriots as our favorite play. That's the top-ranked defense in our model. But my other favorite defenses that you can play this week are going to be the Chargers against the lowly Carolina Panthers here. And then with the news that Jordan Love is going to be out, at least for this week, and that Malik Willis is going to start for the Packers, and he's been in Green Bay for maybe like a grand total of 10 to 14 calendar days at this point, we actually have the Indianapolis Colts as a decent option as well. If you've watched preseason football, if you've watched the spot starts that Malik Willis made for the Titans, if you're a Titans fan, you know that Malik Willis is probably a good quarterback to target with a defense in fantasy football this week. So the Colts also going to be on the table for me. Some high-risk defenses I think you'll see people employ. The Cardinals, even though I do like Rams players this week, Rams are dealing with significant injuries on their offensive line. So Arizona probably going to be a very popular punt as the cheapest defense on the board as well. Weird approach where I didn't necessarily talk about quarterback as much, but there's a lot of directions you can go at quarterback this week, I think, in low-risk contests. Let's just go with our favorite plays here. The Seahawks at defense and, 50-50 per player remaining. So in this particular low-risk build, it'd be hard to get to a modest quarterback. So, let's plug Akins in just to see what we have left. We've got 7,100. So if we pay down at tight end this week, we can play literally any quarterback we want except Lamar Jackson. I like Lamar Jackson in low risk this week. He's one of my favorite plays on the board, but your most popular plays in low risk contests this week are going to be Patrick Mahomes, Jaden Daniels with his rushing upside against the New York Giants this week, Anthony Richardson as the most efficient quarterback of all time, also on the table in low risk contests. Our number one quarterback in our model this week is actually Jared Goff, like by an unhealthy margin. Like he ranks 10 to 15 points higher than any other quarterback in our model. And we were having a hard time trying to figure out what this is, what is driving this. Check out the Daily Plug because I'll go into details on exactly why we think there's a big edge with Jared Goff in tournaments this week. But you can play him here as well. You can literally play anyone in low risk contest here this week. Probably doesn't make sense to deviate too much from this core here. I do think this is a really, really strong cash week on DraftKings. And it's the same thing over on FanDuel, with the exception of, I think DJ Moore at $6,800 would be a great player to consider adding in from that Sunday night football game. We have Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze both dealing with injuries, and they're both highly questionable for Sunday night's game. I think it's pretty likely DJ Moore ends up having a super high floor role as a result here, and he's just $6,800. That's right around the same range. It's a little cheaper, actually, than Rashee Rice, who we like this week. Yosevich is 5,200. We can get to the Seahawks over here on defense. Pricing is a little looser here on FanDuel. Say I have 11-2 here if you go with Akins, and you can literally play any quarterback and have way too much salary left. So I actually think you can pay up at tight end here on FanDuel. You could even just avoid Yoshi and play Debo. And then we could play Akins. And we still have plenty of money to literally play any quarterback you want this week. So this just feels like a pretty formulaic week, if you will, for low-risk contests, especially with high floor receivers at all four positions. I do think the low-risk build is pretty clear this week. At least it is, in my opinion. You might see some different pieces here, like Breece Hall over Kyren Williams. I'm on the Kyren Williams side this week, guys. So the thing everybody likes to watch these videos for, what are we doing to get different in tournaments if it's just so clear what everyone should do in low-risk contests? We have super popular Chiefs. We have super popular pieces from the 49ers and from the Rams. How do we differentiate? We like the highest total game on the board. I know it's crazy to suggest that's going to be low owned, that the Detroit Lions with the highest implied team total, playing at home, favored by a touchdown in a game with a 51.5 point total, are going to be different in DFS this week. So let me show you why. Jared Goff is going to come in about 3 to 5%, at least we think right now in the Occupy model that is going to be the case. You have a wide receiver in Jameson Williams, who was very, very cheap last week, who went off 27.4 DraftKings points. You have the expensive wide receiver, who was kind of effectively taken or neutralized in the game plan by the Los Angeles Rams. Amon-Ra St. Brown is not going to be very popular this week. I think you're going to see the field go with Goff, J-Mo, Laporta, and avoid Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I think you can go with this build here, and you can still get these chalky pieces around it. You can get Jordan Mason. I mean, the salaries are just not even really an issue this week. I can't really stress that enough, that it just seems like it's a pick 'em, play whoever you want kind of week here. So if my core this week is literally Mason Williams and Kupp, I can still do this. I have $39.75 per player remaining. I know my favorite defense is cheaper than that, so that's going to bump up my average salary. I know that we have the quintessential cheap tight end play that we have available to us in Jordan Akins. Now I have $49.50 per player remaining. There are plenty of cheap receivers that are available, one of which is obviously the chalk one everyone's going to play with T. Higgins out again. So if you do that, you have 6,100 remaining. There's plenty of ways to make a Lions 2-0, Lions 2-1 fit this week. That is going to do it for me. There is so much more that I want to say here, but I don't want to give away the keys to the kingdom without giving you more of an opportunity to digest what we have at OccupyFantasy.com. Our model will be updated through Sunday morning. Brian and Moose will be back tomorrow afternoon to do a live stream going over much more than I was able to cover here for what you should do in tournaments. And the Daily Plug, which will be published at OccupyFantasy.com by this evening, will go through everything in depth as well. I'm really excited about week number 2. I think there's a really good chance for us to just make our opponents prove that they know what the best plays are this week. So I look forward to getting out there in those streets and seeing you guys do the same thing. Good luck here in week number 2, and I will be back next week to talk to you about week number 3.